What if I told you that somewhere along the banks of the Nile, more than 3,000 years ago, a team of ancient Egyptian doctors were already writing down detailed notes about something modern medicine didn't take seriously until the 20th century? Women's reproductive health, not myths, not superstition, actual clinical observation, carved into scrolls that somehow survived the collapse of empires, the burning of libraries, and thousands of years of sand. Stay with me, because this story is about to take a turn you won't see coming. Let's go back, really back. Before the pyramids became tourist attractions, before Cleopatra, before most of the history you were taught in school even begins. Picture the Nile at sunrise, glowing amber, mist rising off the water like breath. This river isn't just scenery. It is the reason Egypt exists at all. Without it, this entire civilization would be nothing but empty desert. Along its banks, mud brick homes cluster together, cool and dim inside, built to survive heat that can feel like standing in front of an open oven. Somewhere in one of these homes lived a woman. Historians can only reconstruct through evidence, not name. For the sake of this story, let's call her Meret, a real and common name in ancient Egypt, standing in for thousands of women whose individual identities were never recorded. She wakes before the sun. She grinds grain into flour. She fetches water. She helps weave linen, one of Egypt's most valuable exports, prized across the ancient Mediterranean for its almost impossible softness. Her life is full, busy, physical, and once a month, it includes something history books almost never mention: her period. It's strange, isn't it? We know these people built structures that still confuse engineers today. We know their names, their gods, their burial rituals down to the smallest detail. But something as basic and universal as menstruation? Almost erased from the story entirely. Until you start digging. And once you do, what you find is far more interesting than silence. Here's where most people expect a dark turn. Other ancient cultures treated menstruating women as dangerous, unclean, something to isolate. So surely Egypt did the same, right? Not exactly. And this is where the story gets genuinely surprising. Egyptian religious belief placed enormous power in blood itself. Isis, one of the most widely worshipped goddesses in the ancient world, was deeply associated with healing, motherhood, and the mysterious forces of creation and rebirth. Some historians believe this connection may have shaped a cultural attitude toward menstrual blood that was less about fear and more about mystery and power. It's difficult to know for certain how the average Egyptian woman felt walking through her village on a heavy flow day. But the evidence we do have suggests something far less punishing than what you'd find in many neighboring civilizations. So if she wasn't hiding in shame, what exactly was she using? This is where historians have had to become detectives, piecing together fragments from a puzzle that time has tried very hard to destroy. Some historians believe Egyptian women may have used softened papyrus reeds, shaped and rolled for use during menstruation, though direct physical evidence is extremely limited because organic material like this rarely survives thousands of years, even in Egypt's famously dry climate. Linen, however, we know a great deal more about. Egypt's linen industry was massive and softer. More tightly woven cloth was widely available, especially to wealthier households. Reused, washed, and dried under intense desert sun, cloth strips likely served as the most common and practical method. There's also a detail that tends to make modern audiences sit up straight. A few ancient Greek writers, observing Egyptian customs centuries later, made references suggesting Egyptian women used soft, absorbent plant material in a way that sounds remarkably similar in concept to a modern tampon. Now, historians debate how literally to interpret these accounts, since outside observers often misunderstood or exaggerated foreign customs they didn't fully grasp. But even as a debated theory, it raises a fascinating question. What if the basic idea behind one of today's most common products isn't new at all? What if it's thousands of years old? We don't know for certain. And that uncertainty, strangely, makes the story even more compelling. Now, let's pause here, because something is about to happen that completely shifts the direction of this story. While researching Egyptian medical texts, something almost unbelievable surfaces. A papyrus discovered in the ruins of a town called Kahun, dating back nearly 4,000 years, now known as the Kahun Gynecological Papyrus. It is considered one of the oldest medical documents in human history, focused specifically on women's health. And what's inside it will make you question everything you thought you knew about how primitive ancient medicine really was. Egyptian physicians didn't just treat cramps or irregular cycles. According to this papyrus, they developed an early method for testing pregnancy. A woman would urinate onto separate bags of barley and wheat seeds over several days. If the barley sprouted, tradition held it meant the baby would be a boy. If the wheat sprouted, a girl. If neither sprouted, she likely wasn't pregnant at all. Wait. What? Here's the part that turns this from a strange historical footnote into something genuinely stunning. In the 1960s, modern researchers actually tested this ancient method in a laboratory. And remarkably, the urine of pregnant women did cause noticeably higher germination rates in the seeds compared to urine from non-pregnant women or men, likely due to elevated hormone levels. The gender prediction part wasn't accurate, but the basic pregnancy detection concept showed a genuine, measurable biological reaction, something ancient Egyptian doctors observed and used, without knowing anything about hormones, thousands of years before anyone understood what a hormone even was. Let that settle for a moment. A civilization without microscopes, without any concept of modern biology, developed a method that modern science later confirmed had real, if partial, scientific validity. This wasn't guesswork born from superstition alone. This was careful, repeated observation, refined and passed down over generations, the same way scientific method eventually would be. And once you know this, you start to see Meret's world completely differently. Because if Egyptian doctors were this observant about pregnancy, what else were they documenting? The answer takes us to an even older, even more astonishing source. The Ebers Papyrus, dating back roughly 3,500 years, considered one of the most complete surviving medical texts from the ancient world. Alongside treatments for burns, digestive issues, and skin conditions, that includes multiple references to menstrual irregularities and remedies believed to ease cramping and regulate cycles. Egyptian physicians appear to have viewed a woman's monthly cycle as connected to her broader health, sometimes using changes in it as a signal that something deeper in the body needed attention. This didn't mean their medicine was accurate by modern standards. Many treatments blended genuine herbal knowledge with religious ritual and magical spells, since ancient Egyptians didn't separate medicine from spirituality the way we do today. But the fact that women's reproductive health was documented, studied, and treated at all, using dedicated medical texts, puts Egypt in a genuinely unusual position compared to many other ancient civilizations, where such topics were barely acknowledged in writing at all. Now here's something that makes this story feel even more real, because this wasn't only happening to ordinary women like Meret, it was happening to queens. Consider Hatshepsut, one of the most powerful rulers in Egyptian history, a woman who took the unprecedented step of declaring herself pharaoh, not merely a queen beside a king, but a ruler in her own right, commissioning massive temples and expeditions that expanded Egypt's wealth and influence. She wore the false beard of kingship, She controlled an empire. And somewhere in her private chambers, behind the golden walls of power, she menstruated exactly like every other woman in her kingdom. Biology didn't bow to political power. The same cycle that shaped Merit's month shaped Hatshepsut's month, too. The same physical discomfort, the same need for privacy and practical solutions. It's a strange, humanizing thought, isn't it? Strip away the crown, the temples, the historical legacy, and you find something startlingly ordinary, connecting the most powerful woman in Egypt to the most ordinary one. So if even the pharaoh dealt with this, how did Egyptian society really treat it on a broader scale? Were there restrictions, rules, taboos? Here, the evidence becomes genuinely debated among historians, and honestly, that uncertainty is part of what makes this so fascinating rather than frustrating. Some researchers believe menstruating women may have faced certain restrictions around specific temple rituals or sacred spaces during particular religious events, similar to purity customs found in numerous ancient cultures worldwide. Others argue the evidence for strict exclusion in Egypt specifically is much thinner than commonly assumed, and that daily life, work, and most social activity likely continued largely uninterrupted. We simply don't have a single, definitive ancient Egyptian text laying out clear universal rules the way we might wish we did. What we do have paints a picture of a society that, at minimum, did not treat menstruation as something requiring total silence or complete removal from public life, which, compared to attitudes that would dominate much of the world for thousands of years afterward, is genuinely notable. But then something else surfaced from the historical record, something that completely changed how historians viewed the women living through all of this. Not a papyrus this time. A name. A real one, carved into stone and preserved for over 4,000 years. Peseshe. She wasn't a queen. She wasn't a goddess. She was, according to inscriptions found near her son's tomb at Giza, a physician. Not a healer in some vague spiritual sense. Her title, translated from the original hieroglyphs, reads as something remarkably close to overseer of female physicians, which means one thing that should genuinely stop you in your tracks. If there was an overseer of female physicians, there had to be female physicians for her to oversee. Wait, seriously? A functioning medical profession for women, organized enough to have its own supervisory title, existing during the age of the pyramids, at a time when most of the ancient world wouldn't even record women's names, let alone their professions. And Peseshe wasn't an isolated mystery either. She fits into a much larger and honestly startling pattern historians have pieced together about Egyptian women's legal lives. Egyptian women, unlike women in ancient Greece or Rome, could legally own property in their own name. They could run businesses. They could buy and sell land. They could serve as witnesses in court. They could inherit wealth directly, without a husband or father acting as a legal gatekeeper. And perhaps most strikingly of all, they could initiate divorce, keeping property and assets that legally belonged to them, at a time when women in most other civilizations had virtually no independent legal identity whatsoever. It's the kind of detail that makes you sit back and reconsider everything you assumed about the ancient world. We picture antiquity as uniformly restrictive for women, a slow, linear march from oppression toward equality. But Egypt doesn't fit that timeline cleanly at all. In some very real, very documented ways, an ordinary Egyptian woman 4,000 years ago had more legal and medical autonomy than many European women would have for the next 3,500 years. So if women could be physicians, own land, and control their own bodies legally, a new question starts forming, one that feels almost inevitable now. Did that same independence extend to the most intimate decisions a woman could make, choices about her own fertility, her own family, her own future. The evidence that survives suggests the answer might surprise you even more than everything you've heard so far. And just when you think this story has revealed its biggest surprise, there's one more twist waiting. And it might be the strangest one yet. Because tucked inside that same Kahun papyrus, alongside pregnancy testing methods, are early references to contraception. Egyptian women, according to these texts, used mixtures involving substances like honey, natron, and acacia gum, inserted vaginally as a barrier and spermicidal method. Here's the detail that should genuinely stop you in your tracks. Modern chemical analysis reveals that acacia gum, when fermented, actually produces lactic acid, a compound still used today, in modified form, in some contraceptive products because of its natural spermicidal properties. An ancient civilization, working entirely through observation, trial, and generational knowledge passed between women, stumbled onto a chemically functional method of contraception thousands of years before anyone understood reproductive biology on a cellular level. How does a society, without laboratories, without microscopes, without any understanding of sperm or fertilization, arrive at something chemically effective? The honest answer is patience. Centuries of careful observation, passed down, refined, tested, and trusted, long before anyone had the scientific vocabulary to explain why it worked. It's a humbling thought. We often imagine progress as a straight line, moving from primitive ignorance toward modern brilliance. But stories like this suggest something messier and more beautiful. Knowledge scattered across time, sometimes brilliant far earlier than we assume, sometimes lost for centuries before being rediscovered. So let's return, one final time, to Merit, standing by the Nile, sun warming her shoulders, water flowing endlessly beside her, the way it had for her mother, and her mother before that. She didn't have the vocabulary we have today. She didn't know about hormones, or lactic acid, or clinical trials. But she had something else. A body of knowledge, built slowly, generation after generation, tested through lived experience, and shared in quiet conversations between women that history rarely bothered to write down. She managed her body with the tools available to her. She worked through discomfort most months without pause. She lived inside a culture that, whatever its imperfections, at least attempted to understand what her body was doing, and occasionally even wrote it down for future physicians to study. And now, thousands of years later, here we are, still uncovering her secrets, piece by piece, papyrus by papyrus, still fascinated by how much she and her healers actually understood. Maybe that's the real revelation buried in this ancient mystery. It isn't really about ancient Egypt at all. It's about us. About how something so universal, so deeply human, can be silenced for generations, hidden from history books, treated as unworthy of serious study, even though it connects every single woman who has ever lived, from an unnamed farmer's daughter beside the Nile, to a pharaoh wearing a golden crown, to a woman reading these words on a screen 4,000 years later. The tools have changed. The silence hasn't always fully disappeared. But the thread connecting Murray to every woman alive today has never actually broken. It was simply waiting, buried in sand and scroll, for someone to finally listen.